I didn't know fear could feel this quiet until I found myself sitting in my car with the engine running, staring at my own front door, bargaining with my body to move. I wish I could say I knew, back then, what that moment meant, that I understood it as a warning. But at the time, it just felt like exhaustion mixed with nerves, like something I could push through if I tried hard enough. That's what I'd been doing for a long time already, pushing through. I'm 33 now, and for years I believed my story wasn't dramatic enough to matter. No broken bones, no screaming neighbors, no obvious signs anyone could point at and say, yes, that's abuse. What I had was quieter, slower, harder to explain, even to myself. When I met him, I'll call him Marco, my life was simple. I lived near the edge of the city, worked regular hours, liked routines. I liked knowing what my days would look like. Marco slipped into that life easily. He wasn't intense. He wasn't loud. He listened. Or at least he appeared to. He noticed small things about me. My glasses, the bracelet I wore every day without thinking about it. The way I preferred calm over excitement. It felt like being understood without having to explain myself, and that felt rare. The beginning was gentle, almost boring in the best way. We cooked dinners together, watched shows on quiet evenings, talked about future plans in vague, comfortable ways. There were moments that should have raised questions, small comments, a certain tone, but nothing that felt serious enough to confront. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself this was what stability looked like. Looking back now, I can see the first cracks, but back then they were easy to step over. He asked questions often. Where I was, who I was with, why I hadn't answered my phone. The questions sounded caring, protective. If I hesitated, he smiled and said he worried about me. I remember feeling strangely flattered by that, like my presence mattered that much. Slowly, I started explaining myself more than I needed to, offering details before they were asked for, letting him know my plans even when it didn't matter. It felt easier than sensing his disappointment later. I didn't notice when that ease turned into habit. When we moved in together, everyone said it was the natural next step. I agreed, out loud. Inside, something tightened, but I ignored it. I was good at ignoring things that didn't fit the story I wanted to believe. Living together changed the air between us, not all at once. Gradually, he became more observant, more aware of my moods, my timing, my choices. If I came home later than expected, there were questions. If I wanted time alone, there was tension. If I went quiet, he accused me of pulling away. I learned quickly that certain reactions worked better than others. Apologies worked. Agreeing worked. Explaining myself carefully worked. Standing my ground did not. The first time I felt genuine fear wasn't during a fight. It was during silence. He came home one evening and barely looked at me. No argument, no accusation, just distance, coldness. I asked if something was wrong, and the look he gave me made my chest tighten, like I'd stepped somewhere forbidden without knowing it. I apologized. I still don't know for what. After that, apologizing became automatic. If he was in a bad mood, I searched my memory for what I might have done wrong. If he was irritated, I assumed responsibility. If I felt hurt, I swallowed it, because explaining my feelings usually made things worse. Over time, he started rewriting my reality, not dramatically, casually. If I remembered something differently than he did, he'd tell me I was mistaken. If I reacted emotionally, he said I was unstable. If I expressed fear, he said I was exaggerating. And because he said it calmly, confidently, I believed him. I stopped trusting my instincts. I replayed conversations in my head, trying to figure out how I'd misunderstood things. I told myself I was too sensitive, too reactive, too emotional. It felt easier to blame myself than to consider the alternative. My body, though, knew something my mind refused to admit. I began to feel tense for no clear reason. My stomach knotted when I heard his keys at the door. My shoulders lifted instinctively when his voice changed. I slept lightly, waking at the smallest sound. I started avoiding certain topics, certain behaviors, certain versions of myself. Without noticing, my world shrank. Friends became distant, not because he forbade them, but because it was easier not to explain why I couldn't stay long, why I had to be home at a certain time, why I felt distracted when I was out. I didn't want questions I couldn't answer honestly. At night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, counting my breaths. Some nights he drank too much. Some nights he paced the apartment, restless and angry, at things he never fully explained. Some nights he was calm, which somehow felt worse. Calm meant unpredictability. Calm meant I was about to step on something invisible. I learned to read his moods like weather patterns, the sound of his footsteps, the way he closed doors, the way he sat down. I adjusted constantly, quietly. I thought this was what commitment required. And then there were moments, brief, confusing moments, when he was kind again, when he laughed the way he used to, when he held me and told me I was everything he needed. Those moments kept me anchored. They made me doubt the fear, made me believe I was the problem. By the time I started sitting in my car, before going inside, the fear had become part of my routine. I didn't recognize it as fear anymore. It was just preparation, a pause, a moment to gather myself before stepping back into a space where I no longer felt safe, but couldn't yet admit that to myself. That night. The rain blurred the apartment lights ahead of me. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. My heart was racing. I told myself to stop being dramatic, to just go inside, that nothing bad had happened yet, but my body refused to listen. And for the first time I wondered, quietly, almost guiltily, what would happen if I didn't? I wish I could say that moment in the car changed everything immediately, that I turned the engine off, walked inside, and suddenly saw the truth clearly. But that's not how it happened. Fear doesn't work like that. It doesn't flip a switch. It seeps in. It convinces you to stay quiet a little longer, to wait, to try harder. I went inside that night. The tension was already there, hanging in the air like something electric. He didn't greet me, didn't ask how my day was. He moved around the apartment with sharp, restless energy, opening drawers, closing them too hard. I tried to act normal, put my bag down, asked if everything was okay. The words felt wrong the moment they left my mouth. He turned toward me slowly. His expression was calm, almost bored, and that terrified me more than shouting ever had. Calm meant he'd already decided something. Calm meant there was no room left to fix it. The accusations came fast. Things I'd supposedly said, things I'd supposedly done, conversations I didn't remember having. I tried to explain, to clarify, to slow things down. But every word I spoke seemed to fuel him further. He twisted my explanations into proof that I was lying, that I was manipulative, that I was the one hurting him. At some point, I stopped responding, not because I didn't care, but because my mind felt like it was slipping, like I was watching myself from somewhere far away. My body was tense, ready to move, even though I didn't know where I'd go. That's when I realized something was very wrong. I wasn't thinking about the argument anymore. I wasn't thinking about being right or wrong. I was thinking about escape, about doors, about distance, about how close he was standing. When he stepped toward me, my body reacted before my thoughts caught up. I turned and ran. I didn't plan it. I didn't announce it. I just moved. I locked myself in the bathroom and slid down against the door, my back pressed hard into it. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like it might give me away. I could hear him on the other side, his footsteps, his voice distorted and sharp. The handle rattled. The door shook slightly. I remember noticing strange details in that moment. The cold tile against my legs, the sound of the fan overhead, the way my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I remember thinking with terrifying clarity that if this door opened, I didn't know what would happen next. I whispered when I called for help. Even then, I was afraid of provoking him, afraid of making things worse, afraid that I was overreacting and would regret it. Waiting felt endless. Every sound made me flinch. I kept my weight against the door, like my body could somehow hold it shut through sheer will. I told myself to breathe, to stay conscious, to stay present. When the police arrived, it felt unreal, like the world had shifted into a version I didn't recognize. I was wrapped in a blanket, sitting on the couch, my body shaking with delayed reaction. They spoke calmly, professionally, like this was something they'd seen before. That realization hit harder than I expected. This wasn't unusual. This wasn't shocking to them, which meant it wasn't normal the way I'd been trying to convince myself. I watched as they led him away. He looked angry, embarrassed, not remorseful. He didn't look at me, or maybe he did and I couldn't bear to meet his eyes. I don't remember clearly. My mind was foggy, my thoughts scattered. After they left, the apartment felt enormous and empty, too quiet. I sat there for a long time, wrapped in that blanket, staring at nothing. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't slow down. Every memory replayed itself in fragments. Moments I'd ignored, feelings I'd dismissed, warnings I'd talked myself out of. The days that followed were harder than I expected, harder than the night itself. There were questions, statements, paperwork, people asking me to explain things I still didn't fully understand. I found myself minimizing again, instinctively, saying it wasn't always bad, saying he was stressed, saying I didn't want to ruin his life. That scared me. Even after everything, part of me still wanted to protect him, still wanted to believe there was another explanation, another version of the story where this wasn't what it looked like. I stayed in the apartment for a short time after that, walking through rooms that felt haunted by tension. Every sound made me jump. Every quiet moment felt like it might break open. I slept with the lights on. I checked the locks repeatedly. I jumped at my phone ringing. But the worst part wasn't the fear of him coming back. It was the doubt. I questioned myself constantly. Was it really that bad? Had I misunderstood? Was I too sensitive? Those thoughts crept in during quiet moments, wearing his voice, repeating his words. I realized then how deeply he'd gotten into my head, how much of my inner dialogue wasn't mine anymore. Leaving didn't feel like relief at first. It felt like failure. I packed slowly, carefully, like I was afraid to make noise, even though he wasn't there. I chose what to take as if I were negotiating with myself. This, yes, that no. I stood in the doorway with a box in my arms, looking back at the space where I'd tried so hard to make things work. I almost stayed. What stopped me wasn't strength. It was exhaustion. I was tired of explaining, tired of doubting myself, tired of feeling like survival was something I had to earn. So I walked out, and as the door closed behind me, the fear didn't disappear. It followed me, quiet, persistent. But for the first time, it wasn't in control. Leaving didn't feel like freedom right away. It felt like walking without skin. Every sound startled me. Every unfamiliar space made my chest tighten. I kept expecting consequences I couldn't name. I stayed alert even when nothing was happening, like my body hadn't received the message that the danger had passed. For a long time, I slept poorly. I'd wake up with my heart racing, convinced I'd forgotten something important. Forgotten to lock a door. Forgotten to say the right thing. Forgotten to prevent something bad from happening. I'd lie there in the dark, replaying moments from the past, trying to understand where things had shifted from love into control. The worst part wasn't missing him. It was missing the version of myself I'd lost. I realized how deeply his voice had settled into my thoughts. When I made a mistake, I heard criticism instead of patience. When I felt overwhelmed, I told myself to stop exaggerating. When I doubted a memory, I immediately assumed I was wrong. Untangling myself from that internal presence was harder than leaving the apartment ever was. There were days I felt strong, clear, certain, and then there were days I felt ashamed for still feeling confused. I questioned my own story constantly. I worried that I'd exaggerated what happened, that I'd misunderstood his intentions, that maybe I'd ruined everything over something that could have been fixed. Those thoughts came quietly, pretending to be reasonable, pretending to be fair. What stopped them was repetition, memory after memory resurfacing, no longer isolated but connected. Patterns became visible once I stopped looking at moments in isolation. I started noticing how my body reacted when I talked about him. The tension in my jaw, the way my hands clenched, the way my breath shortened. My body remembered things my mind still tried to soften. Healing wasn't about feeling better all at once. It was about feeling honestly, about allowing anger to exist without immediately silencing it, about allowing grief without explaining it away. I grieved the future I thought I'd have. I grieved the person I thought he was. And I grieved the years I spent believing fear was something I needed to manage rather than escape. There were moments of guilt, too. Guilt for leaving, guilt for involving the police, guilt for not leaving sooner, guilt that didn't belong to me, but clung anyway. Slowly, those feelings lost their grip. I found myself laughing again in small, unexpected ways, at something someone said, at a thought that surprised me. I noticed how different it felt to make decisions without rehearsing them first, to speak without calculating consequences, to sit in silence without waiting for it to turn dangerous. One afternoon, months later, I sat on a park bench not far from where I live now. The city moved around me in its usual rhythm. People passing, leaves shifting in the wind, distant traffic, normal life, unfolding without me needing to brace for it.